Welcome to Creative Tien channel. This is the part 2 of our machine knit socks on the LK150 knitting machine. It's a very simple sock with a short roll heel and a short roll toe. And last time we did the knitting of the main part. We start with the waist yarn and knit about 50 rows. And we will start the short roll heel. It's a basic short roll heel and it doesn't really create any holes. And then we continue to knit this part. I have about 45 rows and we did a short roll toe, the same as the short roll heel. It's nothing fancy, but it works. It doesn't really create any big holes or any bulkiness. This is the inside. And after the toe, I just continue knitting all the rows back and put some waist yarn and take it off the knitting machine. And the exact size really depends on your yarn and the tension and your machine. This yarn is on the thicker side of the sock yarn, so it's more like a sports weight. And I have tension 3. It creates an average woman's medium size socks. You can adjust the tension and yarn size to match your own size. And it's always a good idea to start with a swatch and wash it or steam it to see the final gauge. And you can calculate from that. All we need to do today is to seam it up like so. We can do from the toe up and go up to the cuff. There are a lot of ways of seaming. For me, I think the important part is to keep it flat and without creating holes, because we want the socks to be more comfortable. If it has a ridge inside, some people might not like it. And if it has holes, it's not as warm. So the usual mattress stitch is not a suitable one for seaming the side of socks. And remember to steam it first before you seaming, because after you finish knitting, all the fabric will bunch up and roll up like that, and it's very difficult to see. So the first thing is to cut a long piece of yarn, so it's enough to seam the sides. You will need 2 pieces, one for each side. We are only going to work on the outer edge of the V of every stitch on both sides, and we'll start from toe up. And I start by weaving a little bit below the seam just to secure it. I start by going up to one of the loops. When you see closely, there's usually a loop and a knot. There's a loop here and a knot, the loop and knot, and it's the same on the other side. So we come up from the first loop and then we go to the other side. There's the first loop on the other side. Here, that's between the 2 knots, and then going down. This is just to secure it. And then we'll start the pattern, or you can say the rhythm. This is how I do my flat seam. You go from the loop side up one more time, the same stitch. And then the next stitch is the knot. You go down. Here is a knot. Go down. Loop up, knot down, and then the same on the other side. Find the loop, the next loop. We can work on the first one we worked before. That's the loop. And then the second one is the knot going down. And after the first one, every stitch we will just work on once. And now we go back to this side, the same thing, the next loop up, and then the knot going down. So each side we work on 2 stitches. Now we go on the other side. You have to roll it out a little bit, the loop up. And the knot down. You can do the opposite way, the loop down, knot up, loop down, knot up, but it's easier to poke that little knot down instead of going up because the knot is so small. Just make sure you don't skip stitch. Every stitch is worked on once, the loop and the knot. If you skip stitch, there tend to be some holes when you stretch it out. When you are wearing it, you might see a hole. And at the end, it might not be even when you get to the cuff part. So we just continue working on it, and the sock is almost done. The only thing left is the cuff. I'm just going to use a circular needle and pick up the stitches. You can see the stitches here. That's the one we should pick up. This row here. I put stitch on the needle first and maybe change the direction of the leg if it's not in the correct position. Make sure you pick up the edge stitches too. So I have 21 stitches on each side, and after all stitches on the needle, you can take off the waste yarn. After you take out the waste yarn, you can attach the yarn again and start to do the ribbing. I will just do a basic 1x1 ribbing. You can choose to do 2x2 or 1x2. It's up to you. I'm starting the first round. The right side of the V is not in the front. You can switch it. This one, you can turn it to the right position before you knit, or you can knit through the back to make it look correct. So I'm starting the 1x1. So knit, purl. This one is not correct, so I will switch it. And knit a purl. And then knit. And then purl. Knit. This one is backwards too, so I rehand it so the right leg is in the front. After about 15 rows of ribbing, I'm going to bind off, and there are many ways of stretchy bind off. I'm going to use the Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. That's very popular right now. So the basic of this technique is to add a yarn over in between each stitch, so it has more yarn in between and it gets more stretchy. And because we are doing it in the round, so the first stitch will be a yarn over, and depends on what's your next stitch, the yarn over might look different. For the knit stitch, usually do the knit stitch, we have the yarn in the back like so, and for the yarn over, we are going to have the yarn in the front. So when we knit it, you'll create one more stitch. So we'll knit the first stitch. Now you can see there are 2 stitches. We can bind off the first yarn over stitch. So just move the first stitch across and down. The next stitch is purl, so my yarn over will move the yarn from the front to the back and back to the front. So it creates a loop, but the yarn ends in the front. So we need the purl stitch. And now we have 3 stitches on the needle, and we just bind off the first 2 stitches. Move it, pass through the needle, and now we only have 1 stitch on the right needle. And we continue. The next stitch is a knit, so we just do a regular yarn over. See, now we have 3 stitches, and we bind off the first 2 stitches. And now we need to add 1 more yarn over, and the next stitch is a purl. So we go from the front, make a loop, go back to the front, like so, and then do the purl stitch, and then bind off the first 2, and we just keep going, and you can see it start to create a pretty stretchy bind off. Okay, that's the finish the bind off, and we want to weave in the yarn end so it looks like the V's are continuous on the top. And just sew it so it closes the gap. And then just weave in the end. Weave in the end through the back side, and then you are done. So that's what it looks like for the bind off. It's very stretchy, and if you use a smaller needle you will not notice the flare that much. So I use a US size 0. It's about 2mm needle, and it looks nicer when your ribbon stitch size is smaller than the main part of the knitting. And after I give it a steam, it should straighten up the stitches better for the ribbon. The knitting part on the machine actually doesn't take more than 1 hour for a pair. It's the side seaming part that takes longer, and also the hand ribbon. If you have a standard machine with ribber, you can do the ribbon on the machine, the basic 1x1 ribbon, and end it with waste yarn, and then grab it to the top of the socks. And if you don't like the side seaming by hand, there's another way you can do it on the machine without the hand stitch side seams. I will show it in the future soon. I hope you like this video, and thank you for watching.